and welcome to something very different for me. My 7 series is currently off having some work done by the lovely people at Darkside Developments, and while that's going on they offered to keep me occupied by giving me a couple of cars for review. You see, this is a SEAT Ibiza FR, a 2010 SEAT Ibiza FR, with the difference it's got a 2-litre diesel in it, the same as you would find in a Mark 6 VW Golf, something like that. But this one has been significantly fettled, and it now puts out just shy of 300 horsepower and over 400 pound-foot of torque. That's 550 newton meters for those that like to do it that way. That's pretty darn tasty. In an alternate universe, this is the sort of car that young JayEmm might have been all over were it not for the fact that he needed something big and practical, and so went with estate cars and saloons instead. The mods list of this car is quite significant, and I'll put a link to Darkside's own page in the description below. They've used this as a development car, and so now anybody with something similar who wants something like this can come and try this should they like to get a feel for what it is they're buying into. Suffice it to say, this is not just a quick remap. Oh no, this is actually quite a serious piece of work. Now, I must confess that I was the sort of person, if you said Darkside 2, I'd have had an image of a couple of guys in the back of a shed throwing out cheapy remaps and putting dodgy exhausts onto cars. But the truth could not have been further from that if it tried. They have a 2-acre site with some very nice, very new buildings, a really decent team, and they're doing an awful lot of work in-house. In fact, at the moment, it's only really machining which is farmed out, and even that they're looking to do themselves in the near future. They've got a great team, and more than the odd mad professor as well. This thing is awesome. As with many performance diesels, below about 2000 RPM, you don't get a lot. But when you hit 2.5, this thing just flies. I haven't yet actually found the red line, but this thing has an impressive spread of torque. It really does. Now, when you first get into it, impressions aren't that brilliant, because you turn the key and if you're expecting it to sound good, it doesn't. In fact, it conjures up memories of the old Fiat Ducatos that for various reasons I spent a lot of my youth driving. The car shakes and shimmies and it feels like there's a very loud discotheque next door. That's no doubt in part due to the Vibrotechnics engine and gearbox mounts. The car's also reasonably firm, running on some Ibex springs with a white line anti-roll bar, and I have to say, it's actually a pretty decent setup. But if I put myself in the position of a sort of early 20s, perhaps late teens, sort of fast hatch enthusiast, it's actually very well judged. It's firm, but not crashy. I think it's actually pretty good. Now, the steering is very typical VAG, doesn't want to talk to you at all, but it does exactly what you tell it to, and the car's actually pretty darty. It's only in the sort of tighter corners where with these relatively cold tyres it doesn't want to grip, but this thing is a heck of a lot of fun to hoon. Although it would be fair to say that these days diesel has somewhat fallen out of favour, I really can still see the appeal, and I understand exactly why so many people went for it. After all, not only will this car give you some serious performance, but it can also return excellent fuel economy. I know these engines very well, and claims of over 60 to the gallon are not unfounded whatsoever. This is a very, very versatile unit. Ibizas can also be had at relatively cheap prices now, and they are decent cars. I mean, they are simply a Polo by a different name, and for a lot of people, including myself, that is a good thing. This one isn't really creaking or rattling or anything else. The seats are pretty nice. The 6-speed gearbox is decent, although that has had work done to it as well. A lot of parts been uprated, including selector forks and all sorts of things. But it's nice to use. And I've got to point out something. I've just got out of a very serious car. They have a KTM that they let me have a little play with just before this, and this does not feel slow. After jumping out of a KTM, that is something to say. This still does not feel slow. It's really incredible how this thing just picks up and then keeps going. And that's the bit that surprises me the most. I've been in a lot of performance diesels where you put your foot down, you get this enormous shove, you go, whoa, and then that's it. It's done. She's got nothing more to give. But in this, it just keeps pulling and pulling and pulling. Again, as is often the case with a lot of these diesels, you'll find that when it's off boost, it really is off boost. If you catch it out, there is nothing to give whatsoever. And that means that you do have to exercise caution if you're going for overtakes and the like. You've got to make sure that the car is ready to go, because if it isn't, you're going nowhere. However, third gear, we're at a 50 mile an hour limit from a 30 foot down, and there's a moment, and then Bill, 40 mile 50. That's how quick this car is. It shifts. And I have to say, once you get it up to 50 mile an hour, a lot of the harshness goes away. You've still got a fair bit of road noise coming through those tyres, but it's actually not a bad thing to be in, and you could very happily do big miles in it. This is, of course, the kind of car that is most likely to be somebody's only car, and therefore it has to be able to do everything. The boot isn't the biggest. It's going to be the same as any old Ibiza, of course. Darkside haven't modified the boot, but it works well enough. It's a good all-rounder, this car, and I don't feel like it's been broken. It's maybe been perhaps a touch compromised, but not broken at all. I'm going to be trying another one of their cars, which I'm going to be spending a little bit more time with, which is another VAG product, but of a very different flavour, and this really is quite promising. The way the power is delivered is nice too. It's very smooth, it's very decent, it's very linear, and although of course you've got that transition between off and on boost, that's dealt with very nicely. The car isn't trying to pull me into a hedge or anything like that. It's actually really well judged, and I've driven so many of these cars that people have tuned up, put silly power into, and they've just been undrivable. They've been no fun. Not the case with this at all. Let's show you what it can do. So we're in second gear now, and they told me to find the rev limiter, so I'll find the rev limiter. I'm at 2,000 RPM now. 3, 4, 5, there it is. It's just over 5. And that thing pulls so hard. Yeah, it's only when you're getting up to higher speeds that it does start to pull and move the nose a little bit unexpectedly. But it's a really well put together thing, this car. It really feels like a proper package. Very nice indeed. I have to say, I've completely misjudged the people at Darkside. This is a really decent product, and I'm happy about that, because it means that my Beamer is in safe hands. If you haven't seen that video, it's currently being media blasted. They're throwing some walnuts at the engine in the hope that it'll sort out a problem I'm having. This is a riot. I tell you something, alternate universe 21-year-old JayEmm would have been all over this. Brakes are uprated as well. They work really nicely, very progressive. You can even heel and tow in a diesel. Let's go for one more, shall we? Whee! Anyway, thanks for watching. Hope you've enjoyed this very different video of mine. Please tell me if you have, or indeed if you haven't. Like, comment below, subscribe if you haven't already, because that's very important too. And I'll see you all for the next one. Bye bye.